He had not eaten lunch in 11 months and 3 days. Not because he forgot, not because he was busy, and not because he was one of those people who simply did not care much about food. He had counted the days. He knew exactly when it started. He knew exactly why. And every single afternoon when the clock in the break room at Hargrove Industrial Supply ticked past noon, and the other men on the floor headed toward the vending machines or pulled sandwiches from brown bags, Marcus Hale went outside to the parking lot, sat on the hood of his 2009 Dodge pickup, and ate nothing. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He drank a bottle of water. He looked at the sky. He thought about his daughter Lily, who was 9 years old and whose school-packed lunch cost $2.35 every single weekday. He thought about the electric bill. He thought about his neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Tran, who was 71 years old and had not left her apartment on the second floor of the building on Sycamore Terrace in 14 days, because the arthritis in her knees had made the stairs feel like a small personal mountain she could no longer afford to climb. And then Marcus Hale put the bottle of water back in his coat pocket and went back inside and ran the parts counter until 5 o'clock with the same quiet steadiness he brought to everything. He was not a large man. He was not the kind of man who filled a room when he walked into it, the kind whose presence announced itself. He was medium height, with wide hands worn from 12 years on a factory floor, dark hair that had started going gray at the temples sometime around the year his wife Claire died, and brown eyes that looked at people with a directness some people found surprising in a man who spoke so quietly. He was 38 years old, and he lived with his daughter Lily in apartment 4B at Sycamore Terrace, a 3-story building on the south side of Millhaven, Ohio, where the parking lot needed resurfacing and the hallway lights on the second floor had been flickering since October, and the property manager, a man named Gerald, had been promising to fix them for 6 weeks and had not yet done so. Marcus had moved to Sycamore Terrace 2 years ago after Claire's death, when the mortgage on the house they had owned together on Birchwood Lane became something he could no longer manage alone on a single income. He had sold the house quietly, without drama, taking only what he and Lily genuinely needed and leaving behind the things that belonged to a version of his life that no longer existed. He had packed Lily's books and her art supplies and her collection of small ceramic animals that she lined up on her windowsill every Saturday morning in an order that made complete sense to her and that he had learned not to disturb. He had packed his tools, his coffee maker, his good winter coat, and the photograph of Claire and Lily taken at Millhaven Lake the summer before Claire got sick. He had put that photograph on the dresser in his room where he could see it from the doorway, and he had built their new life around it the way people build things around the things that matter most. Sycamore Terrace was the kind of building where people mostly kept to themselves, not from unfriendliness but from the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from working hard and coming home tired and not having very much left over for neighbors. Marcus understood that exhaustion completely. He felt it himself most evenings. But he also believed, quietly and without making any speeches about it, that paying attention to the people around you cost nothing and sometimes mattered more than anything else you could offer. It was this belief, simple and entirely his own, that had drawn him to Evelyn Tran. He had met her on his second day in the building, passing her in the hallway on the second floor while she was carrying a bag of groceries that was clearly too heavy for her. He had taken it without asking, because asking sometimes gives people the chance to say no when what they actually need is for someone to simply help them. He had carried it to her door. She had thanked him with the particular formal politeness of a woman who was not accustomed to accepting help and was not entirely sure how she felt about it. He had said it was no trouble. He had meant it. Her name, he learned over the following weeks, was Evelyn Tran. She had lived in apartment 2C for 11 years, longer than any other resident in the building. She had come originally from Hue, Vietnam, arriving in the United States in 1989 with her husband Min, a mechanical engineer who had worked for 30 years at a manufacturing firm in Columbus before the firm closed and their retirement savings took a hit they had not fully recovered from before Min's heart attack took him 3 years ago. She had one son, Thomas, who lived in Seattle and called on Sundays. Thomas was a good son, she told Marcus once, in the careful way that people say things when they are trying to be fair to someone they love while also being honest about the distance between them. He called every Sunday. He sent money when she let him know she needed it. He was busy. He had his own life. She did not want to be a burden. That word. Marcus had heard it from Evelyn the way he had heard it from his own mother, the way women of a certain generation used it, not as a complaint but as a kind of personal policy, a decision they had made somewhere along the way that their needs would be minimized and their difficulties would be carried quietly, and they would not ask for more than the world had already decided they were allowed to have. He had never agreed with the policy. He simply understood where it came from. Over the first year in the building, Marcus had developed what he thought of privately as a system, though system was too formal a word for something that had grown so naturally out of ordinary attention. He knew when Evelyn's grocery delivery was scheduled and was usually in the second-floor hallway when it arrived so he could carry it up for her. He knew that she liked to sit by her window in the mornings with her tea and could tell from the angle of the curtain whether she had had a good night or a difficult one. He knew that the arthritis was worst in cold weather, that November through February were the months when the stairs became genuinely impossible for her, and that she would rather go without than ask anyone to help her get what she needed. He knew that her favorite thing to eat, which she mentioned once in passing and he had remembered for 8 months, was a particular Vietnamese soup called bun boi hue, and that she had not had it since Min died because making it alone for one person felt, in her words, like too much. He had looked up the recipe online on a Tuesday evening, while Lily was doing homework, made it on a Saturday afternoon with Lily helping him slice the vegetables with the small knife she had been practicing with, and brought a container to Evelyn's door without making any announcement about it. Evelyn had opened the door, looked at the container, and then looked at Marcus for a long moment without saying anything. Then she had said very quietly that she hadn't smelled that in 3 years. He had told her it probably wasn't perfect. She had told him it was exactly right and closed the door, and he had heard nothing else. But the following Monday morning, there was a small package outside apartment 4B containing a folded note and a tin of Vietnamese coffee that Evelyn's son Thomas had sent from Seattle, which she had been saving for a special occasion and had decided this qualified as one. That was 14 months ago. In those 14 months, Marcus had done many things for Evelyn Tran that he had never mentioned to anyone, not because he was secretive about them but because they had not seemed to require mentioning. He had changed the light bulb in her hallway when she could not reach it safely. He had sat with her one evening in November when the cold front came through and the arthritis was bad enough that she could not sleep, and they had drunk tea together in her small kitchen, and she had told him about Hugh in the old days, about the river and the markets and the smell of jasmine in the summer, and he had listened in the way he always listened, fully and without impatience, and she had said at the end of the evening that talking to him was like talking to Min, which he understood was the highest thing she knew how to offer. And for the past 11 months Marcus had stopped eating lunch. He had not planned it as a sacrifice. It had not started with any dramatic decision. It had started with a Thursday in January when Evelyn's heating unit failed and the building's maintenance response time was, as Gerald had warned them all in an email that seemed to take the position that this was somehow the tenant's responsibility, up to 72 hours. January in Millhaven was not the month to be 71 years old in an apartment with no heat. Marcus had called a repair service himself that afternoon. The bill had been $212. He had put it on his card, knowing it would take several weeks to manage, and adjusted the budget accordingly. Lunch was the easiest thing to remove. But then February came and Evelyn's prescription copay had gone up because her insurance plan had changed in ways she did not fully understand, and the new monthly amount was $40 more than it had been. $40, which was nothing to some people and was something to Evelyn, who was very careful with the fixed amount she received each month and who would simply go without the medication rather than tell Thomas and worry him. Marcus had started picking up her prescription at the pharmacy himself on the first of every month and leaving it outside her door with her mail, as though the pharmacy had simply delivered it. She had not questioned this. He was not sure whether she had believed it or had chosen not to examine it too closely, and he had never raised the subject. March brought Lily's school field trip to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, $45 per student. May brought a dental appointment for Evelyn that her coverage didn't fully absorb. June brought a new pair of shoes for Lily because she had grown, again, with the relentless determination of a child who did not understand what shoes cost. July brought the air conditioning unit in Evelyn's apartment that stopped working on the hottest week of the year, and Marcus, who had a mechanical aptitude from his years on the factory floor, had taken it apart on his day off and found the problem and fixed it with a $12 part from the hardware store in 6 hours of work, and charged Evelyn nothing. He had not eaten lunch in any of those months. He had also not told anyone about any of it. Not his coworker Ramon, who would have offered to help and whom Marcus genuinely liked but did not want to put in the position of feeling obligated. Not his mother in Cincinnati, who called every Sunday herself and who would have sent him money. He could not allow her to send because she was 64 years old and managing her own retirement carefully. Not Lily, who was 9 and perceptive in the way that children raised by thoughtful people become perceptive, and who had noticed that her father was thinner than he used to be but had not yet connected the observation to the question she had not yet thought to ask. He had told no one because in Marcus Hale's understanding of the world, kindness that announces itself is a different thing than kindness that simply is. He had been raised by a woman who cooked meals for sick neighbors without telling them she had done it, who drove elderly members of her church to appointments without tracking the hours, who had once spent an entire week helping the family next door sort through the belongings of a parent who had died, and who had never once used the word sacrifice to describe any of it. His mother had called it just being a person. He had grown up believing she was right. The thing about a life built on quiet choices is that it does not look like much from the outside. From the outside, Marcus Hale was a 38-year-old widower working the parts counter at Hargrove Industrial Supply, raising his daughter alone in a 3-story building on the south side of Millhaven, driving a truck that needed new brake pads and a timing belt that had been overdue since August. From the outside, there was nothing remarkable about him. No grand gestures, no defining moments you could point to on a timeline, no chapter of his life that would make a newspaper story. Just a man going to work every day, coming home to his daughter, eating nothing at noon, and making sure his neighbor on the second floor had heat and medication and soup. What Marcus did not know, what he had no way of knowing on any of the ordinary days that made up those 11 months, was that someone had been watching. Not in the way that word usually implies, not with surveillance or calculation or any kind of cold, deliberate attention, but watching in the way that people sometimes watch without meaning to, in the way that proximity to genuine goodness can draw a person's eyes without their consciously deciding to look. The woman in apartment 2B had been watching. Her name was Dorothy Chen, and she had moved into Sycamore Terrace 8 months ago from a corporate apartment in the Millhaven financial district after what she had described to the property manager, to whom she offered absolutely nothing personal, as a change in circumstances. She was 63 years old, though she looked younger, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of precise, efficient bearing that comes from decades spent in rooms where precision and efficiency are required. She dressed well in the casual way of someone who has spent so long buying quality things that quality has become simply the default. She drove a car that did not belong in the Sycamore Terrace parking lot, a silver Lexus that looked, as Marcus's coworker Ramon had once observed while walking Marcus to his truck, like it had wandered in from a different zip code and was too polite to say so. Marcus had noticed Dorothy Chan the way he noticed most things, carefully and without making a production of it. He had held the building door for her twice. He had nodded to her in the parking lot. He had seen her, once, standing very still in the second-floor hallway at an unusual hour, looking at the flickering light with an expression that suggested she was calculating something, though what he had not been able to determine. He had not thought much about her beyond that. He had his own life to attend to. What he did not know was that Dorothy Chun had moved to Sycamore Terrace intentionally. What he did not know was that the change in circumstances she had mentioned to the property manager was not financial difficulty, not a divorce, not a relocation from somewhere else. What he did not know was that Dorothy Chun was the founder and recently retired chief executive officer of Chun Harlan Group, one of the largest privately held logistics and supply chain firms in the Midwest, a company with a portfolio that included manufacturing partnerships, distribution networks, and a charitable foundation that had been funding workforce development programs in economically disadvantaged communities for 19 years. What he did not know was that Dorothy Chun had spent the last 8 months doing something she had not done since the early years of building her company, living quietly among people who had no idea who she was, watching how the world moved when it was not performing for her benefit. She had done this before twice. The first time 30 years ago, when she was building Chun Harlan from a 2-person operation in a rented Columbus office and had moved temporarily into a neighborhood on the east side of the city that her investors had described as challenging, and where she had learned more about what her company actually needed to do in the world than she had learned in any boardroom conversation. The second time, 15 years ago, when a philanthropic initiative she was designing had required her to understand what daily scarcity actually looked like from the inside, and she had spent 3 months living on a reduced income in a small apartment in Cleveland, and had come away with a clarity about her foundation's work that she had never achieved from the remove of a corner office. The third time was now. It was different this time because she was not working on a specific project. She was simply tired in a way that 8 months of rest had not yet resolved. Tired in the way that happens after decades of being the most important person in every room, and she had wanted, more than anything she had wanted in years, to simply be ordinary for a while. To shop at the same grocery store as everyone else. To sit in the parking lot of the Sycamore Terrace building on an autumn evening and watch the other residents come and go and feel, for the first time in a very long time, like she was not the center of anything. She had not expected to find anything. She had simply expected to rest. Instead, she had found Marcus Hale. She had first noticed him on a Tuesday in October, her second month in the building, when she had been sitting in her car in the parking lot after coming home from a walk, too tired to go inside immediately, letting herself be still in the way she had been practicing. She had seen him come out of the building's side door, still in his work clothes, carrying a paper bag. He had not gone to his truck. He had gone up the exterior staircase on the far side of the building, which she knew led to the second floor landing near the apartments facing the back lot. She had thought nothing of it. She had seen it again the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Always after work, always quietly, always with a bag that he carried up and came back down without. The third time, she had been curious enough to pay closer attention. She had watched from her window and seen him knock softly at the door of apartment 2C. She had seen the door open. She had seen Evelyn Tran, whom Dorothy knew from the hallway as a small, upright woman with silver-streaked hair and a formal politeness that Dorothy recognized as the kind that comes from long practice, take the bag with both hands and say something. She had watched Marcus wave it off the way people wave off thanks when the thing being thanked for seems to them very small. He had gone back downstairs. She had sat at her window for a long time after that. She had started paying closer attention. She had noticed the pharmacy. She had been behind Marcus at the counter of the Millhaven Walgreens on a Saturday morning. Not because she was following him, but because she used the same pharmacy and the same early hour, and she had seen him pick up a prescription for Tran, Evelyn, and pay for it from his wallet with the particular efficiency of a man performing a routine task. And she had noted the name on the bag, and she had noted the fact that he did not seem to think it required any further consideration. She had noticed the lunchtime absence. She had gone to Hargrove Industrial Supply in September for a part she needed for a maintenance issue in her apartment, because she handled her own maintenance when she could, and she had seen Marcus at the counter, and she had come back in October for something else, and she had noticed both times that the break room was full of people at noon and Marcus was not among them. She had asked, on the second visit, making ordinary conversation, whether the man at the parts counter was on his lunch break. The young woman at the front desk had said no, Marcus didn't really take a lunch break. He usually just went outside for a bit. Dorothy Chen had run a company for 31 years. She knew how to read the shape of a situation from a limited number of data points. She had sat with what she was observing for 2 months, checking it against itself, making sure she was not building a narrative from coincidence. She was not the kind of person who acted on sentiment alone. By the time November arrived, she was certain. She was also aware of something she had not expected to find at this stage of her life, something she would not have known to look for if she had not been sitting still long enough to see it. She was moved, not in the abstract way that a charitable foundation board presentation could move her, not in the managed emotional register of a well-produced impact report. She was moved in the specific, personal, slightly inconvenient way that happens when you see someone doing something genuinely good with no audience and no expectation of anything in return, and you understand that this is not performance, it is simply character. It is simply who they are. She had met very few people in her life who were simply who they were without any editing for the room they were in. Marcus Hale did not know she existed as anything other than the quiet woman in 2B with the expensive car. He did not know any of this on the Thursday in the second week of December when he came home from work to find that the heating unit in Evelyn's apartment had failed again, this time completely, and the repair service was telling him the part needed to be ordered and the earliest they could come was Saturday. He did not know any of it on that Thursday evening when he moved his own space heater from his bedroom to Evelyn's apartment and told her it was an extra one he had lying around, which was not precisely true, and on which she had looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression she wore when she had decided not to argue with a thing because she understood the shape of why it was being offered. He did not know any of it on the Friday when he borrowed a second space heater from Ramon at work and brought that one up too, so that the bedroom and the sitting room were both warm enough. He did not know any of it on Saturday morning when he sat in the parking lot in his truck in the cold and called the repair service to push them on the timing and was told Saturday afternoon at the earliest. He had been sitting there in the truck for about 10 minutes when there was a knock on the passenger window. He looked up. Dorothy Chen was standing outside, wearing a gray coat and carrying a travel mug, and looking at him with the directness of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to spend a lot of time deliberating about it at the last moment. He rolled down the window. She said, "The heating unit in 2C has been out since yesterday." It was not a question. "They're coming this afternoon," he said. "I know. I called them this morning and asked them to move it up." A pause. "They said there was already a note on the file from someone who had called 3 times this week." Marcus looked at her. "It's cold," he said simply, meaning the apartment, meaning Evelyn. Dorothy nodded once. "I know." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Do you drink coffee?" He looked at the travel mug. "I do. I have a full pot inside and nowhere to be until this afternoon." Another pause, and then something crossed her face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "Come in for a bit. It's cold out here." He had looked at her for a moment. He had the instinctive hesitation of a man who has spent a great deal of his life not wanting to be any trouble. Then he thought about Evelyn saying that exact phrase about herself in her small kitchen, and he thought about how he had felt when she said it. "Sure," he said. "Thank you." He got out of the truck. Dorothy Chen's apartment was not what Marcus had expected. He was not sure exactly what he had expected, given the car and the general quality of her coat, but what he found was a space that was surprisingly spare, almost deliberately so. Good furniture, but not much of it. Books, many of them, arranged with a precision that suggested they were consulted rather than displayed. A kitchen that looked genuinely used. A table by the window with a clear view of the back parking lot and the second-floor landing above it. He understood, looking at that table and its sight line, that she had been watching the second-floor landing for some time. He sat across from her and she poured coffee, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have both learned to be comfortable with quiet and who recognize that quality in each other. Then she said, "How long have you been skipping lunch?" He looked at her over the coffee cup. "I asked your coworker," she said simply. "I was back at Hargrove last week for a part. The young woman at the front desk is very talkative." He set the cup down. "About 11 months. She didn't react with the alarm or the pity he might have expected. She simply looked at him steadily, the way someone looks at a fact they are filing accurately. "Because of the heating bill in January," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Among other things. The prescription, the field trip, the air conditioning unit in July." He looked at her. He did not feel intruded upon, which surprised him. He thought about why and decided it was because she had said it plainly, without drama, the way you state things you have observed rather than things you are judging. "You've been paying attention," he said. "I have," she said without apology. "I'm sorry if that's uncomfortable. I'm not apologetic about paying attention. It's one of the few things I do well." He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "Because I moved into this building 8 months ago because I was tired of rooms where everyone was performing something, where everyone was being a version of themselves that was edited for the audience." She looked out the window at the parking lot. "I wanted to see what people were actually like when they didn't know anyone important was watching." He followed her gaze. "And what are people like?" She was quiet for a moment. "Mostly they're tired. Mostly they're just trying to get through it. Which I already knew." She looked back at him. "But occasionally you find someone who is tired and still choosing something. Not because anyone is watching and not because they expect anything back. Just choosing it because it's the right thing." He didn't say anything. "You're one of those people," she said. The statement sat in the room between them without fanfare. Not a compliment in the usual sense, not something that required a modest deflection. Just an observation from a woman who had spent a long time observing. Mrs. Tran is alone, he said finally. And she's too proud to ask for help, which I understand. So I help without making it a thing. He shrugged slightly. My mother did the same for her neighbors. I don't think it requires much analysis. Dorothy looked at him. No, she said. It doesn't. She wrapped both hands around her mug. But it does require something. And that something, most people decide they don't have enough of it to spare. He thought about that for a moment. He thought about the parking lot at noon and the bottle of water and the way he had stopped thinking of it as deprivation sometime around February, somewhere around the third month, when it had simply become part of the rhythm of his day. It's not a big deal, he said. No, she said quietly. It is. The repair technician arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Marcus was there when he came, carrying the ordered part in a box, and between Marcus's assistance and the technician's tools, the unit was fixed by 4 o'clock. Evelyn stood in her kitchen doorway watching them work, offering tea twice, which they both accepted the second time, and at the end of it she had looked at Marcus with that expression she wore, the one that said something she did not always put into words. He had retrieved his own space heater from her bedroom. He had told her Merry Christmas, because it was 2 weeks before Christmas and it seemed like the right thing to say. She had told him she would make him something. She said it the way she said the things she meant, completely, without inflation, without performance. He had said there was no need. She had looked at him over her glasses and said there was every need, and that was the end of it. He had gone back upstairs to 4B, where Lily was at the kitchen table drawing something with the absorbed concentration she brought to everything she made, and he had made dinner and they had eaten together and he had not mentioned any of it. Lily had told him about a girl at school named Priya who had a dog that was afraid of its own shadow, and they had laughed about that, and the evening had been ordinary and warm and entirely itself. He did not think about Dorothy Chen again that evening. He did not think about the conversation at her table or the way she had said it is a big deal with a quiet certainty that had landed somewhere in him that he did not usually leave accessible. He did not know what she was thinking in apartment 2B, 3 floors below, at the same hour. He did not know that she had spent the afternoon making 2 phone calls. The first was to her assistant, a woman named Patricia who had been with Dorothy for 22 years and who took the call on a Saturday afternoon without surprise because Dorothy Chen called on Saturday afternoons when she was in the middle of something that required speed and precision, and those were the days that required Patricia. The second call was to her son, James, who ran the Chen Harlan Foundation from the company's Columbus headquarters and who listened to his mother for 11 minutes without interrupting, the way he had learned to listen to her when she was telling him something he needed to understand completely before he responded. When she finished, James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to do this the quiet way or the visible way?" Dorothy thought about Marcus in the parking lot. She thought about 11 months and a bottle of water and 3 calls to the repair service and a soup recipe looked up on a Tuesday evening. "The quiet way first," she said. "And then we'll see." She hung up. She looked out the window at the parking lot, where Marcus's truck sat in its usual spot, the one near the east entrance where the lot light was brightest, because he had once mentioned to the building's residents in a group text that the far corner of the lot was a safety concern after dark and Gerald had not yet addressed it, and so he parked near the light and left the far corner for the people who didn't know to avoid it. Dorothy Chen, who had built a company from nothing, who had sat across negotiating tables from people who thought they could diminish her, who had made decisions worth many millions of dollars on the basis of careful observation and genuine principle, sat at her table in apartment 2B and felt something she had not felt in a considerable number of years. She felt like she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. She opened her laptop and began to type. Outside, Mill Haven went on with its December evening. The parking lot light came on. The second floor hallway flickered, and then, for the first time in 6 weeks, held steady, because the maintenance crew Dorothy had personally engaged on Monday had finally found time to address it. Up on the 4th floor, apartment 4B had its lights on, and through the window, if you were standing in the right place in the parking lot, you could see the shape of a man and a small girl sitting at a kitchen table in the warm, ordinary light of a December evening, doing nothing remarkable at all. The second week of December moved the way December weeks move when you are working full days and managing a household and watching your daughter finish the semester, with a speed that feels, in retrospect, like the weeks were simply passing themselves forward while you were attending to the details. Marcus worked his shifts at Hargrove, ran the parts counter, drove Lily to school in the mornings, picked her up at the after-school program 3 days a week when the sitter, a retired teacher named Mrs. Okafor from the first floor, was not available. He brought groceries up to Evelyn twice that week, bananas and the specific brand of crackers she liked and the green tea she had been out of. He ate nothing at noon. He drove the truck with the brake pads that needed replacing but had been holding for 2 more weeks. He saw Dorothy Chen once more that week, in the hallway on Wednesday morning, and she had nodded to him in a way that was somehow different from her previous nods, though he would have found it difficult to explain exactly how. There was a quality in it that he could not name. He had nodded back and gone down the stairs and gotten into his truck and driven to work and not thought about it again until he was at the parts counter and the afternoon slow period came and he was standing there with nothing to do for 15 minutes, and it came back to him without announcement, the way small things sometimes return. He had not told Lily about her. He had not told Lily about any of it, the specifics of the past 11 months, the skipped lunches, the prescription costs, the heater in January. Lily was 9 and she was perceptive and he trusted her completely, but he also believed that a father's job is to make sure his child's life is as uncomplicated by financial anxiety as it is possible to make it. And Lily's life was not without difficulty. It had not been without difficulty since Claire died. But Marcus had worked very hard to ensure that when Lily went to sleep at night, she went to sleep feeling safe. Not deceived. Simply safe. Lily knew they were careful with money. She was not naive. She had her mother's directness, which meant she asked questions and expected honest answers, and Marcus had always given them to her in language she could carry without being crushed by it. She knew that things cost money and that they had a certain amount of it and that this was why some things were yes and some things were not right now. She had never once complained about this, which Marcus found remarkable and also, occasionally, heartbreaking in the way that children who are too understanding too early can be heartbreaking to the parents who raised them that way. On the Thursday of that week, Lily came home from school with a permission slip for the class Christmas party, which required a $5 contribution toward the food. She handed it to Marcus at the kitchen table with the particular careful neutrality she employed when she knew something had a dollar amount attached to it and was not sure whether the dollar amount was going to be a problem. He took the slip, read it, put it in the bill folder on the counter, and said yes, and watched her face release the small tension it had been holding. He had felt that release land in his chest like something physical. $5. He thought about that afterward, while she was doing her homework and he was making dinner. $5 was less than 3 days of skipped lunches. $5 was something he had managed without difficulty. But the fact that she had handed him the slip with that careful neutrality, that she had learned at 9 years old to read the air in a room before asking for the things she needed, that was something that Marcus sat with in the quiet of the kitchen while the pasta boiled and the evening darkened outside the window, and it was not comfortable to sit with. He had not come up with an answer by the time dinner was ready. He set the bowls on the table and called Lily in, and they ate and talked about the school party and the ceramic animals on her windowsill and the movie they were going to try to see at the Dollar Cinema on Saturday. An older animated film Lily had been wanting to see for a year and which had finally arrived at the discount showing. He did not find an answer that evening. He simply held it. The Friday of that week was the 22nd of December. Marcus worked a half day, as Hargrove closed early for the holiday weekend, and he was home by 1 in the afternoon. He had no particular plans for the afternoon. He had a short grocery list, Christmas food, simple things, and he intended to clean the apartment and wrap the 2 gifts he had bought for Lily, a set of colored pencils from the art supply store on Jefferson Street that she had mentioned twice and thought he had not heard, and a book about ocean animals that he had found at the used bookstore downtown and that he knew she would read cover to cover in approximately 3 days. He was in the parking lot, just back from the grocery store, carrying 2 bags toward the building entrance, when he saw the envelope. It was tucked under his windshield wiper. A plain white envelope with his name written on it in handwriting he did not recognize, clear and precise and somehow authoritative. He set the grocery bags on the hood of the truck and took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a folded note and a smaller sealed envelope within it. He unfolded the note first. It said, in the same clear handwriting, Mr. Hale, I have been your neighbor for 8 months. In that time I have observed that you are a person who gives without accounting for what it costs you. I have been in rooms all my life with people who give very publicly and count very privately, and I want you to know that what you do is not that. It is something rarer and I recognize it because I was raised by a woman who did the same thing and whose example I have spent 63 years trying to live up to. Open the second envelope when you are alone. It is not charity. It is acknowledgement. Please don't argue with me about it. I have a feeling you will want to and I am asking you not to. Merry Christmas. Chen. He stood in the parking lot for a moment. He looked at the second envelope. He looked at the building, at the second-floor windows, at the window of apartment 2B. The curtain was not moving. There was no one visible. He put the grocery bags in one arm and walked inside and took the elevator upstairs, which he did not usually do but the bags were heavy, and went into 4B and set the groceries on the counter and stood there for a moment. Then he opened the second envelope. He read what was inside. He set it down on the counter very carefully, the way you set down things that require care. He stood in his kitchen for a long time. Outside, the December afternoon was doing what December afternoons do in Ohio, going dark early, the light pulling away from the parking lot and the bare trees along the Sycamore Terrace fence line, the sky settling into the particular gray-blue of late December that is not quite night and not quite day. Inside apartment 4B, the grocery bags were on the counter and the refrigerator was humming, and somewhere below in the building, a door opened and closed. Marcus Hale stood in his kitchen and looked at what Dorothy Chen had written, and he thought about his mother, and he thought about Claire, and he thought about Lily handing him the permission slip with that careful neutrality, and he thought about 11 months and a bottle of water. He did not feel overwhelmed. He felt very quietly, and in a way he would have found difficult to explain to anyone, as though something had been returned to him that he had not realized he had given away. He put the envelope in the bill folder on the counter, next to the Christmas party permission slip. He began putting the groceries away. When Lily came home from Mrs. Okafor's at 4 o'clock, he was already in the kitchen making dinner, and the apartment smelled like garlic and the particular good smell of a home where someone is cooking with attention, and she dropped her backpack in the hallway with the tremendous crash she always managed to produce and came into the kitchen and asked what was for dinner, and he told her, and she said good because she was hungry, and he handed her a piece of bread to hold her over, and she sat on the counter the way she sometimes did and told him about her afternoon, and the evening was ordinary and warm and entirely itself. He did not tell her yet. He would, but not yet. For now, the evening was ordinary, and ordinary was something he had learned to hold carefully, because ordinary was what everything else was built on. He did not know what was coming on Christmas morning. But Dorothy Chen in apartment 2B was making plans. Christmas Eve in the Hale apartment was a quiet thing, the way it had been for the past 2 years, since the version of Christmas that belonged to the life before had packed itself away with the house on Birchwood Lane, and the woman who had made that house feel like the particular kind of home that you only understand the weight of after it is gone. Marcus and Lily had built their own version of the holiday, small and deliberate and theirs. They made sugar cookies in the afternoon, which Lily decorated with a focused artistic seriousness that Marcus found both impressive and quietly hilarious. Tiny snowmen with expressions of philosophical despair. Christmas. Trees that leaned with a kind of avant-garde confidence. They watched one movie after dinner, a tradition Lily had established and which Marcus observed without modification because he understood that small traditions, even new ones, carry the same weight as old ones when you are 9 years old and building your sense of what the world is supposed to feel like. They read together before bed, a chapter from whatever book Lily was working through, and then Marcus sat on the edge of her bed the way he had since she was small and talked with her for a few minutes about nothing in particular, just the comfortable currency of the day winding down, and then he turned off her light and stood in the hallway for a moment in the quiet. He had not told her about the envelope. He had not told her about what was inside it, which he had read twice in the kitchen after putting the groceries away and which he had not fully absorbed either time, in the way that you sometimes cannot absorb something because your understanding of the scale of things does not yet have a category large enough to hold it. He had placed the envelope in the bill folder, where it sat between the Christmas party permission slip and the December electric bill, and he had gone about the evening with the careful ordinary attention he brought to all evenings, and he had thought about it only intermittently in the spaces between things, the way you think about something you are not yet ready to fully examine. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and took it out again. The second envelope had contained 2 things. The first was a card, simple and unadorned, with Dorothy Chen's handwriting inside. The second was a cashier's check. The card said, "This represents 11 months of lunches, at a conservative estimate of what a decent lunch costs a working man in this city. compounded by the interest of someone who knows exactly what it means to choose others over yourself and wants you to stop doing it at your own expense. The foundation will be in touch after the new year. There is more to discuss. But first, Merry Christmas. Give your daughter something good. You have earned it. She has earned it. He looked at the check for a long time. It was made out to Marcus J. Hale. The amount was $11,000. He had looked at it the first time in the kitchen and set it down and looked at it again. He had thought about 11 months. He had thought about Dorothy Chen sitting at the table by the window in apartment 2B, the clear sight line to the second-floor landing, the way she had said it is a big deal with the particular certainty of someone who does not use words carelessly. He had thought about the foundation she had mentioned, the foundation will be in touch. He had thought about the Lexus in the parking lot and the expensive coat and the phone call she had made Saturday morning that had moved the repair technician up from Saturday afternoon to 2 o'clock. Something Gerald, the property manager, had not managed in 11 days of being asked. He had sat at the kitchen table on Christmas Eve and looked at the check for a long time. He did not feel elated. He did not feel the sudden rush of relief that a person might imagine feeling when something like this arrives. What he felt was something quieter and more complicated. Something that had to do with what it means to be seen, specifically and accurately, by someone who had no obligation to look. He thought about the amount. $11,000 was not a fortune. He understood that at some level it was a modest gesture for a woman who had founded and run a company of the scale Dorothy Chen had described in the brief, factual manner of the second conversation. He now realized he needed to think about very differently. But $11,000 was, for Marcus Hale, something real and specific. It was the brake pads and the timing belt on the truck. It was the security deposit on a slightly better apartment, if that was ever the right choice. It was Lily's summer art program that she had mentioned once and then never mentioned again, the one at the Millhaven Art Center that cost $300 for 6 weeks and that he had looked up online late at night and quietly added to the list of things he was working toward. It was room to breathe for the first time in 2 years. He put the check back in the envelope. He put the envelope back in the bill folder. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, which he had expected. Christmas morning arrived the way it always does in Ohio in December, gray and cold and quiet, the light coming up slowly over the parking lot, the bare trees along the fence line motionless in the still air. Marcus was up before Lily, as he almost always was, and he made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the parking lot. Dorothy Chen's Lexus was in its usual spot. He looked at it for a moment. Then he poured his coffee and went to get Lily's gifts from the closet where he had been keeping them wrapped. Lily woke at 7:15 and came out of her bedroom in her pajamas with her hair undone and her eyes still soft from sleep, and she stopped in the hallway when she saw the gifts under the small tree they had decorated together 2 weeks ago. A tabletop tree with lights and the ornaments they had kept from Birchwood Lane, the ones that carried the weight of the years before. She was 9 years old and she was not too old for Christmas morning, not yet, and she stood in the doorway looking at the gifts with an expression that Marcus held in his memory the way he held the important things, carefully and with full attention. They sat together on the floor by the tree the way they always did. She opened the colored pencils first and her face did the thing he had been hoping it would do. The full unguarded brightness of a child getting something she had wanted and had stopped letting herself want too loudly. She opened the Ocean Animals book and held it in both hands and read the back cover. Immediately, which was exactly what he had known she would do. She said it was perfect. She meant it. He could tell the difference. He made pancakes. She set the table, including the folded napkins, a habit she had picked up from somewhere, and which he had never corrected because there was something about it that moved him in a way he could not fully explain. They ate together and she talked about the book and about what she was going to draw first with the new pencils and about whether the Dollar Cinema would have anything good in January. He listened and answered and drank his coffee and thought, quietly and without disturbing the morning, about the envelope in the bill folder. After breakfast, while Lily was settled on the sofa with the Ocean Animals book, he sent a text to the number Dorothy Chen had written inside the card. He typed, "I don't know how to thank you. It's more than I can say adequately in a text message. But I want you to know that I understand what you did and why, and I don't take it lightly. Thank you. Merry Christmas." He sent it and set the phone on the counter. The reply came 11 minutes later. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Hale. Please fix the truck." I hear the brakes when you pull out of the lot. There will be a call from my office in the first week of January. I hope you'll take it. DC. He looked at the text for a moment. He thought about the fact that she could hear the brake pads from the second floor. He thought about 11 months and a bottle of water and a woman who had moved into Sycamore Terrace to see what people were actually like when they didn't know anyone important was watching. He typed, "I'll take the call." And yes, the brakes. He sent it and put the phone away and went to sit with Lily on the sofa. She was on page 37 of the Ocean Animals book. She looked up when he sat down and leaned against him the way she sometimes did, unselfconsciously, with the complete comfort of a child who trusts that this is simply where she belongs, and went back to reading. He sat there with his daughter on Christmas morning in apartment 4B at Sycamore Terrace, with the small tree lit and the colored pencils still in their case on the table and the gray December light coming through the window, and held the morning in his hands the way he held things that mattered. He was sitting there an hour later when someone knocked on the door. He answered it. Evelyn Tran was standing in the hallway. She was wearing her good coat over her housecoat, which meant she had come up the stairs on Christmas morning, which meant the stairs had been worth climbing to her on this particular occasion. She was holding a container. It was large and it smelled, through the closed lid, of something warm and deeply familiar. She held it out to him with both hands. He took it. "Bon boyau," she said. "For you and Lily. I made too much." The particular fiction she employed when she was doing something she did not want examined. He recognized it because it was the same fiction he used when he brought things to her door and said he had extras. He looked at the container. He looked at her. He felt something move in his chest that he did not try to name. "Thank you, Mrs. Tran," he said. She waved it off the way he always waved off her thanks. Then she looked at him for a moment over her glasses with the expression she wore when she was going to say something she had been considering for a while. "You have been a good neighbor to me," she said. "More than a neighbor." She paused. "I am not someone who says things like this easily. I want you to know that I know what you have done." Another pause. "All of it." He held the container and looked at her. "Min would have liked you very much," she said. He did not trust himself to speak for a moment. He managed a nod. She seemed to understand that the nod was sufficient and turned and began the careful process of going back down the stairs. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Tran," he said. She lifted one hand without turning around. "Merry Christmas," she said. He stood in the doorway until he heard her door close on the second floor. Then he went inside. Lily appeared from the sofa when she smelled the soup. She lifted the container lid and said, with the absolute authority of a 9-year-old with strong opinions about food, that it smelled incredible. They had it for lunch, reheated carefully on the stove, and it was, as Evelyn had once said about his version, exactly right. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The first week of January arrived with the particular blunt efficiency of a new year that has no interest in easing anyone in gently. Marcus was back at Hargrove by the 2nd. The holiday week had been quiet, a few days of unhurried time with Lily, a drive out to Cincinnati to see his mother on the 27th. A visit that had been warm and unremarkable in the way the best visits are. His mother making the food she always made and asking the questions she always asked and sending them home with a container of soup and a bag of oranges because she had always believed strongly in oranges during cold weather. He had not told her about the envelope either. He was still working out what to tell people and in what order. The call came on Wednesday, January 4th, at 10 in the morning. Marcus was on his lunch break, sitting in the parking lot with his bottle of water, which was still his habit even though it no longer needed to be, because 11 months of anything becomes the shape of your day whether you intend it to or not. The number on his phone was a Columbus area code. He answered it. The woman on the line introduced herself as Patricia Osei, executive assistant to Dorothy Chen. Her voice was warm and efficient in equal measure, the voice of someone who has spent decades being the most organized person in a room and who finds this agreeable rather than exhausting. She said that Ms. Chen had asked her to reach out to discuss an opportunity through the Chen Harland Foundation. She said she understood this might be unexpected. She said Ms. Chen had asked her to convey that there was no obligation of any kind, that the conversation was entirely at Marcus's discretion, and that if he preferred not to engage, that was completely understood. Marcus listened to all of this and then said, "Tell me about the opportunity." Patricia was quiet for a moment, as though she had been prepared for more resistance. Then she said, very precisely, "The Chen Harland Foundation had been operating a workforce development initiative in Mill Haven for 4 years, focused on skilled trades training and job placement for adults in economic transition. The initiative was managed by a small local team and had been delivering solid results. But the Mill Haven program manager position had been vacant for 7 months because the right candidate had not yet appeared. Ms. Chen had identified someone she believed was right for the position and wanted to discuss it with him directly. Marcus sat in the parking lot. He looked at the Hargrove building. He thought about 12 years on the factory floor and the parts counter and the particular satisfaction he took in fixing things and in helping people navigate problems they did not know how to solve on their own. "What does the program manager do?" he asked. Patricia described it. Overseeing the training program operations, coordinating with partner employers, supporting the participants through the job placement process, problem-solving the daily logistics of running a program that served 40 to 60 adults at a time. She named the salary. It was more than 30% above what Marcus earned at Hargrove. There were benefits. There was flexibility. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a management background," he said. Patricia said Ms. Chen had anticipated he would say that. She said Ms. Chen's view was that the people who run programs for workers in economic transition are almost always most effective when they have lived the thing themselves, and that management is a skill that can be developed, and that the quality she was looking for in this position was not a resume, it was character. Marcus thought about that word. Character. He thought about Dorothy Chen at her table saying, "I recognize it because I was raised by a woman who did the same thing." "Can I have a few days to think about it?" he asked. "Of course," Patricia said. "Ms. Chen says to take whatever time you need. She also says to fix the truck first. She wanted me to include that." He almost laughed. "She mentioned the truck." "She mentioned the truck," Patricia confirmed pleasantly. "He said he would be in touch by the end of the week." He thanked her. He sat in the parking lot for the remaining 10 minutes of his lunch break, not eating out of pure habit, looking at the sky. He called his mother that evening. She answered on the second ring the way she always did, and he told her everything. The envelope under the windshield wiper, the check, the card, the phone call that morning. Dorothy Chen in apartment 2B, watching for 8 months, making 2 phone calls on a Saturday afternoon. He told her about the 11 months of skipped lunches which he had not mentioned before, and there was a silence on the line while his mother absorbed that, the specific kind of silence that is not emptiness but fullness, a person holding something carefully before responding. Then his mother said, "Marcus." He said, "I know. You should have called me," she said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't call me because you didn't want me to send money." "Yes." Another silence. "You are your father's child," she said, and it was not a complaint. She had loved his father, a man who had carried things quietly and helped people without accounting, and who had died at 56 of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, which Marcus thought about sometimes when he was being too stubborn about asking for help. "What do you think about the job?" he asked. His mother did not answer immediately. He could hear her moving in her kitchen, the familiar sounds of her house in Cincinnati, the creak of the floor near the back door, the sound of a chair being pulled out from the table. "I think," she said carefully, "that someone has been watching you for 8 months and what they saw was someone worth watching, and I think that says more than any resume." A pause. "What does Lily think?" "I haven't told her yet." "Tell her," his mother said. "She's 9, not 4. She can hold it." He smiled. "I know. And Marcus." Her voice shifted slightly. "Let it be a good thing. Don't spend the next 6 months looking for the catch. Some things are what they appear to be." He told her he would try. He meant it. He told Lily after dinner that night. He sat her down at the kitchen table, which was where the serious conversations happened in apartment 4B, and he told her in the careful, honest language he had always used with her about real things. He told her about Mrs. Chen in apartment 2B, about what she did, about the foundation and the phone call and the job. He told her about the check. He told her about the 11 months. Lily listened the way she always listened to serious things, with her full attention and her hands flat on the table in front of her, very still. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't eat lunch for 11 months? No. Because of Mrs. Tran's heater and medicine and things? Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. 9 years old, with her mother's directness and her grandmother's steadiness and her own particular quality that was entirely her own. Something he had watched develop over the years with the quiet amazement of a parent who understands that children arrive as themselves and you mostly just try to stay out of the way. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. You should have eaten lunch." He looked at her. "I know. Mrs. Tran would not have wanted you to not eat lunch." "No, she wouldn't have." Lily considered this. "But I understand why you did," she said. "Because you knew she wouldn't have let you help her if she knew it was costing you something." He looked at his daughter. 9 years old. "That's right," he said. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Is the job a good job?" "I think it might be. Do you want to do it?" He thought about the description Patricia had given him. 40 to 60 adults at a time, navigating economic transition, the specific problem-solving of running something that mattered, the satisfaction of seeing someone get to the other side of a difficulty. He thought about his 12 years on the factory floor and what he knew about what workers needed and what they didn't get and what made the difference between someone who made it and someone who couldn't quite get there. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." Lily nodded again with the air of someone who has asked the relevant questions and is satisfied with the answers. "Then you should take it." She picked up her pencil from beside the notebook she had been drawing in before dinner. "And you should eat lunch." "I will," he said. "Every day," she said. "Every day," he agreed. She went back to her drawing. He sat at the table for a moment longer, watching her. Then he got up and did the dishes. He called Patricia on Friday morning and said yes. She said she would send the formal offer paperwork by end of day. She said Miss Chen was pleased. He said he was grateful. He meant both things. He took the truck to the mechanic on Saturday. The brake pads and the timing belt came to $840. He paid it from the check with the particular feeling of a person doing something they have been not doing for too long, not relief exactly, something more like the correction of an imbalance, the world returning to a level it should have been at for some time. He drove home from the mechanic and the truck drove like a different truck, quieter and more certain, and he thought about what it means to defer things until they become emergencies and then to let someone help you address them before they get there. He thought about this in a way that had nothing to do with trucks. Dorothy Chen knocked on his door that Sunday afternoon. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the place on Jefferson Street that she had apparently been going to every Sunday and that Marcus had not known existed, which meant he had been walking past a good coffee shop for 2 years without investigating it. She held 1 cup out to him in the way of someone who has decided a thing and is not negotiating it. "You're going to want to sit down," she said. "There are things I should tell you that I should have told you sooner." He took the coffee. He gestured inside. She came in and sat at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her, and Lily, who was in her room drawing, appeared in the doorway almost immediately because she had her mother's radar for interesting developments. Dorothy looked at Lily for a moment. Then she said, "You must be Lily." Lily said yes with the directness of a child who has nothing to hide. "Are you Mrs. Chen from downstairs?" "I am. Dad says you're very observant." Dorothy looked at Marcus. "Did he?" "He said you could hear the truck brakes from the 2nd floor," Lily said. "That is very observant." "I've had a lot of practice," Dorothy said. "May I stay while your father and I talk? Or would you rather I come back when it's just the 2 of you?" Lily looked at her father. He gave her the small nod that meant she could make her own call. She looked back at Dorothy with the evaluating seriousness of a 9-year-old who takes the responsibility of evaluation seriously. Then she came and sat down at the table. "You can stay," she said. Dorothy set her coffee down. She told them the fuller version of who she was, not everything but the significant things. The company, built from a 2-person Columbus office in the early 90s. The years of growth and the decisions that shaped the culture of what Chen Harlan became. The foundation, established 19 years ago, the workforce development programs, the particular focus on economic mobility for people who were doing everything right and still not getting to the other side of it. She told them about the 3 times she had lived plainly among ordinary people and what she had learned each time. She told them about Sycamore Terrace and what she had intended and what she had found instead. She told it in the way she told things, precisely and without sentimentality, though the precision itself was a kind of respect that was more moving than sentiment would have been. Lily listened with her hands flat on the table, very still, which Marcus recognized as her mode of genuine attention. When Dorothy finished, Lily said, "Why did you come to Sycamore Terrace instead of somewhere nicer?" Dorothy looked at her. "Because nicer was the problem. I'd been somewhere nicer for 30 years and it had stopped teaching me anything." Lily considered this. "That makes sense," she said. "My teacher says you don't learn very much inside your comfort zone. Your teacher is right. She's very smart. She also makes us memorize the state birds, which seems less useful but maybe has a purpose I haven't understood yet." Dorothy's mouth did the thing that was not quite a smile but was warmer than one. Marcus recognized it. He had seen it in the parking lot on that Saturday morning, and in the hallway, and now across his kitchen table. He was beginning to understand that it was her closest equivalent of warmth fully expressed, that a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms where everything was measured had learned to keep her warmth in a place that required some attention to find. He liked her, he realized. He liked her in the straightforward, uncomplicated way you like people who mean what they say and say what they mean and do not require you to perform anything in return. "There's something else," Dorothy said, looking at Marcus. He waited. "The program manager position is real and it's yours if you want it. But I want to be transparent about something I should have said when Patricia called." She set down her coffee cup. "This position is also one I've been building toward for the Millhaven program for some time. The person who fills it will eventually take on a larger role in how the foundation operates in this region. That's not pressure. That's information. I believe in giving people the full picture so they can make informed decisions." Marcus looked at her. "How large a role?" "Regional director, potentially, in 2 to 3 years. Overseeing the program expansion I've been planning for Northern and Central Ohio." She met his eyes. "It's not guaranteed. It depends on performance and fit and about a dozen other things. But I want you to know what the road looks like before you start walking it." He sat with that for a moment. Regional director. 2 years ago he had been selling the house on Birchwood Lane and moving into a 3-story building on the south side of Millhaven because it was what he could manage. 12 months ago he had been calculating whether he could afford lunch. "Why me?" he said. Not with false modesty, with genuine inquiry. Dorothy looked at him. She considered the question the way she considered everything. Then she said, "Because in 8 months of watching this building, I saw approximately 43 separate interactions between residents. In 41 of those interactions, people were either performing something for an audience or managing something for their own convenience. In 2 of them, someone was simply doing what was right without any calculation about whether it would be noticed or returned." She paused. "You were both of those 2. He looked at her. "What was the other one?" Dorothy picked up her coffee. "Your daughter," she said. "She gives Mrs. Okafor on the 1st floor the extra cookies from the Christmas party every year. She's done it twice. She doesn't mention it to anyone." Marcus looked at Lily. Lily was looking at the table with the expression of a child who has been mentioned in a way she finds mildly embarrassing but essentially accurate. "Mrs. Okafor likes the ones with the sprinkles," Lily said. "She told me that last year." Dorothy looked at this 9-year-old girl and then looked at Marcus with an expression that said, without words, that this was her answer more fully than anything she could have articulated. The 2nd week of January carried the weight of things beginning. Marcus gave his notice at Hargrove on Monday morning. His supervisor, a man named Bill Greer who had worked with Marcus for 7 years and who communicated almost entirely in single syllables and meaningful silences, heard the notice and nodded once and said "good for you" in a tone that meant he meant it. Ramon said he was going to miss him at the parts counter and that he was stealing the good parking spot the following Monday and that Marcus should come back and visit. The young woman at the front desk cried briefly and then denied it. He worked his 2 weeks with the same steadiness he had always worked. He started at the Chun Harland Foundation Millhaven office on the 23rd of January. The office was on the third floor of a building on Commerce Street, small and organized, with a staff of 3, a program coordinator named Anita, an administrative specialist named Douglas, and a data analyst named Priya, who was, coincidentally, the same age as Lily's friend at school with the shadow-fearing dog, though she was 26 and considerably more confident than the dog. They received him with the cautious welcome of a small team that has been operating without a leader for 7 months and is not entirely sure what to make of the person arriving to fill the gap. He understood that. He had been new before. He had spent 12 years on a factory floor where the culture was established and the hierarchy was clear and newcomers were watched carefully before being trusted. He knew how to be patient. He knew how to listen before he talked and to watch before he acted and to let his presence speak for itself over time. By the end of the first week, Anita had shown him the full program participant files, which he had read with the attention of a man who understood that each file represented a person trying to get somewhere and having difficulty with the distance. Douglas had walked him through the operational systems, which were functional but had clear inefficiencies Marcus had already begun mapping in his notebook. Priya had given him the data overview, which told a story of a program that was genuinely helping people but was not reaching as many people as it could, held back by logistics problems that were solvable with the right kind of attention. He called Dorothy on Friday afternoon of his first week and told her what he had found. She listened without interrupting, which he was coming to understand was her primary mode of engagement. Then she said, "What do you need?" He told her. She said yes to everything he asked and no to one thing, and explained why with the precision of someone who has learned that explaining your reasoning builds more trust than simply issuing a verdict. And he understood the reasoning and agreed with it, and they ended the call with a clarity that felt, to Marcus, like standing at the top of a staircase and being able to see exactly where it went. He drove home from the office in the truck that no longer made the sound it had been making for 8 months, and he thought about the difference between knowing where you are going and having a road to get there on. At Sycamore Terrace, things had shifted in small ways that accumulated into something visible. Evelyn's son Thomas had called on a Sunday and Evelyn had told him about the Christmas morning visit and about the soup and about Marcus, and Thomas had called Marcus directly on a Wednesday evening to thank him. A phone call that had been slightly awkward in the way of phone calls between people who have not met but who are connected through someone they both love, and that had ended with Thomas saying quietly that he had not known how difficult the stairs had become, that his mother had not told him, and Marcus had said only that she was a private woman and that she was doing well and that he should maybe plan a visit in the spring. Thomas had said he would. Marcus believed he meant it. The flickering light in the second-floor hallway had been fixed. Dorothy had arranged it without fanfare, making the call to an actual electrician rather than waiting for Gerald, and had not told anyone she had done it. Marcus had noticed it was fixed on a Tuesday evening and had stood in the second-floor hallway for a moment looking at the steady light, and he had felt something that he identified, after some consideration, as the satisfaction of a person who understands that small things matter and who watches small things get better. He had told Mrs. Okafor on the first floor that her kindness to Lily at the after-school hours had meant more to him than he had said at the time. Mrs. Okafor had looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who knows that the real kindness is hearing it said back, and had invited him and Lily for dinner the following Saturday, which they had attended and which had been warm and very full of food and entirely good. He had taken Lily to the Dollar Cinema on a Saturday in late January. They had seen the animated film she had been waiting for, and it was, as she pronounced on the drive home, even better than she had been hoping, which she said was unusual because usually things are a little less good than you hope. He had agreed that this was usually true and was glad it had been an exception. He was eating lunch. Every day at noon he ate lunch. The first few weeks it felt slightly strange, the relearning of an ordinary thing, the permission to simply be hungry and address it without calculation. He went to a sandwich place 2 blocks from the Commerce Street office with Anita on Thursdays, which had become a standing thing, and ate a turkey sandwich and talked about the program with the pleasure of someone who is doing work that makes sense to them. On the other days he packed something from home, and he ate it at his desk or at the small table in the office break room, and it cost him nothing except the money it cost, which was the only thing it was ever supposed to cost. By the first week of February, the first participant he had personally worked with through the intake and training process, a man named Victor Sands, 44 years old, formerly a machinist who had been laid off when his plant closed, had completed his training and been placed with a manufacturing partner firm in the Eastern Millhaven district at a wage that was 40% above what he had been earning before the plant closed. Victor had come into the office on his last day of the program and shaken Marcus's hand and said, "Man, I thought I was done. I thought at my age that was it." Marcus had told him 44 was not an age, it was a beginning, and had meant it. Victor had laughed and thanked him and gone to his new job. Marcus had sat at his desk afterward and thought about the difference between a door being closed and a door being somewhere you haven't looked yet. He had thought about himself, 8 months ago, in the parking lot at noon with a bottle of water, driving a truck with brake pads that needed replacing, unable to see a road from where he was standing. He had thought about the envelope under the windshield wiper. He had thought about Dorothy Chen watching from apartment 2B, patient and precise and entirely certain of what she was seeing. He had thought about what it costs to trust that someone else can see you clearly, and how rarely in a person's life that trust turns out to be right. He picked up his phone and sent a text. Not to Dorothy's number, but to the building group chat for Sycamore Terrace, which he had helped establish 6 months ago, and which Gerald had never participated in but which the residents used with increasing frequency for things that needed addressing. He typed, "The lock on the east entrance has been sticking again. Happy to look at it this weekend if no one has already reported it to management." Mrs. Okafor replied immediately with a thumbs-up emoji. The resident from 3A, whose name was Philip and who had 3 cats and very particular opinions about parking etiquette, replied with the word "finally" in capital letters, which had nothing to do with the lock specifically but communicated a general satisfaction with things being attended to. Evelyn, who had been on the group chat for 6 months and had never sent a single message, sent a small image of a sun. Marcus looked at the image for a moment. Then he smiled and went back to work. Dorothy Chen was not at Sycamore Terrace in February. She had returned to Columbus in the middle of January, to the house she kept there, the work of the Foundation's board season, and the particular demands of being Dorothy Chen in the world rather than the quiet woman in apartment 2B. She had told Marcus she would keep the apartment, that she returned to Millhaven monthly, and that she found it useful to have a place where she was not, as she put it, being anything in particular. She called him on the first Tuesday of February, a check-in that had become a weekly rhythm, not because she was managing him but because they had discovered in the kitchen over 2 cups of coffee on a gray Christmas morning that they were people who thought similarly about things that mattered, and that this was rarer than either of them had remembered to expect. She asked about the program. He told her about Victor. She listened and was quiet for a moment and then said that this was why the work mattered, specifically the 44-year-old machinist who thought he was done, and Marcus said yes. She asked about Anita and Douglas and Priya. He gave her honest assessments, which she received without defensiveness because she had always preferred honesty to comfort and had spent decades building a culture where the two were not in conflict. She mentioned an opportunity she was exploring to expand the Millhaven program into a second site in the spring, if the data supported it. He said the data was going to support it. She said she expected nothing less from him. Before she ended the call she said, "How's your neighbor?" He knew she meant Evelyn. "Good," he said. "Thomas is planning to visit in March." "Good," she said. A pause. "You knew that if you left the building, you'd still go back and check on her." It was not a question. "Of course," he said. "I know," she said. "That was not me doubting it. That was me confirming that it's still the same person who was parking in the lot spot by the east entrance because it was the brightest one." Another pause. "Some people, when their circumstances change who they are. I wanted to make sure that was not going to happen to you." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you've been watching?" "No," she said. "I watch because it's how I understand things. It's how I've always understood things." A pause. "But checking, yes, that's part of it. And you're exactly who you were," she said. "Which is the only thing I was actually confident about and the one thing I was glad to confirm." He sat at his desk after the call and looked at the window that faced Commerce Street. January had resolved into February without a great deal of ceremony. The program was running. Victor Sands was at a new job. Lily was on chapter 4 of a new book. Evelyn had been to a church service for the first time since November because Thomas had found an accessible entrance she had not known about and had called to tell her. The truck ran quietly. Lunch was something Marcus ate every day at noon. He thought about the shape of a life before and after a single act of being seen. He thought about the difference between being invisible and being unseen. He had not been invisible, he understood now. He had been there entirely himself, doing exactly what he was doing, in plain sight. He had simply been in a place where the right person had not yet looked. Dorothy Chen had looked. That was the whole of it, really. A woman who had decided to stop performing for rooms and to simply watch, who had moved into an apartment in a building on the south side of Millhaven and sat at a table by a window, and who had seen a man parking near the light so others could use the safer spot and carrying groceries to a second-floor door and eating nothing at noon for 11 months, and who had recognized what she was looking at, and who had then done what people who have genuine power do when they have been raised by the right kind of women and have spent a lifetime trying to live up to that example. She had done something. It was not the something Marcus would have expected, because he had not known to expect anything. He had not been doing any of it for someone else's eyes. He had not been building toward anything. He had simply been, day after day, in the parking lot and on the second-floor landing and at the pharmacy counter and in his kitchen making soup, the person he had been raised to be. What he did not yet know, on that February afternoon at his desk on Commerce Street, was that Dorothy Chen's 2 phone calls on that Saturday in December had not ended with Patricia Osei and James Chen. There had been a third call. He would find out about the third call in March when Thomas Tran came to visit his mother, and something happened that Marcus had not anticipated and that would change things in a way he was not prepared for, and that was entirely right because the best things in Marcus Hale's experience were the ones that arrived before you knew to expect them. Outside the Commerce Street window, Millhaven went on with its February afternoon, cold and purposeful and entirely unaware that anything remarkable had happened or was continuing to happen inside it, which was, Marcus thought, looking out at the street, exactly how remarkable things usually work. They do not announce themselves. They simply are. And then, if you are paying enough attention and if you are sitting still long enough to see, you look up one day and understand that the world has shifted. Not because the world decided to, because someone did. Thomas Tran arrived on a Saturday morning in the middle of March, driving a rental car from the Columbus airport, and Marcus saw him from the 4th-floor window before he had even parked. He was tall, like his father had been in the photographs Evelyn kept, with the same upright posture his mother carried, and he walked toward the building entrance with a rolling suitcase and a second bag over one shoulder and the particular careful energy of a man who has been carrying guilt about a distance for a long time and has finally decided to close it. Marcus had known he was coming. Evelyn had told him the week before with a quietness that was different from her usual quietness, fuller somehow, the way a room feels different when something good is about to happen in it and the room already knows. He had not known what Dorothy's third phone call had been. He had thought about it occasionally in the weeks since she had mentioned it, in the way you think about things you cannot yet see but can feel the shape of. He had not asked. He understood, from the way she had mentioned it, that it was not his to ask about yet. Some things arrive in their own time, and asking them to arrive sooner only changes the shape of them. He found out on the Saturday Thomas arrived, not from Dorothy, but from Evelyn herself. He had gone down to the 2nd floor mid-morning to drop off a bag of green tea he had picked up at the Asian grocery on Jefferson Street, the specific brand she liked, and Evelyn had opened the door and Thomas had been standing in the small sitting room behind her and had turned when the door opened. He was 39 years old, a software engineer, and he had his mother's eyes and his father's hands and an expression that Marcus could only describe as someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it. They had shaken hands. Thomas had said, "I've wanted to thank you in person for a long time." Marcus had said there was nothing to thank him for. Thomas had looked at him with the particular look of a man who has heard that sentence before and does not believe it. Then he said, "There is. And I want to tell you something my mother didn't ask me to tell you, something I decided on my own." Evelyn had gone to the kitchen to make tea. The way she went to make tea when she wanted 2 people to have a conversation without her formally witnessing it. Marcus had always appreciated that particular grace in her. Thomas sat down. Marcus sat across from him. Thomas said, "A woman called me in December. She said her name was Dorothy Chen." He said it the way people say names they have looked up afterward and understood the weight of. "She told me about you. Not in a way that made you sound remarkable," he said, "though you are. She told me in a way that made me understand what my mother's daily life had actually been, and what it had cost someone who had nothing extra to spare to make sure it was all right. He looked at his hands. I didn't know about the heating bill. I didn't know about the prescription. I didn't know about the stairs. Marcus was quiet. My mother doesn't tell me things because she doesn't want to be a burden, Thomas said. And I let her not tell me because it was easier than asking the right questions. He looked up. That is something I have to live with. But Dorothy Chen called me and told me that my mother had a neighbor who was eating nothing at noon every day so that she could be warm and medicated and not alone. And she said, I think you should know what's been happening in your mother's building. I think you should know who is watching out for her. He stopped. Outside the window of apartment 2C, the March afternoon was doing what March afternoons do in Ohio, uncertain and shifting, the light moving between cloud and clear in long, slow passages. I'm moving to Columbus, Thomas said. I put in for the transfer 4 months ago and it came through last week. I'll be 40 minutes from here. He said it simply, without theater. I should have done it 2 years ago. I didn't because distance is easy to maintain when no one holds a mirror up to what it actually costs. He met Marcus's eyes. She held the mirror. Marcus thought about Dorothy at her table by the window. 3 phone calls on a Saturday afternoon. Patricia, James, Thomas. She had not told him. She had simply done it the way she did all the significant things, without announcement and without waiting for credit. He thought about his mother, who had cooked meals for sick neighbors without telling them she had done it. He thought about the way some people carry goodness not as a performance but as a practice, daily and unwitnessed and entirely genuine. He thought about Dorothy Chen, who had built a company and a foundation and a life of real consequence and who had moved into apartment 2B because she wanted to remember what things looked like when no one was performing anything. She had found him, and in finding him she had found Thomas. And Thomas had found his way back to his mother. Marcus sat in Evelyn's sitting room and felt something he did not have a precise word for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was part of it. Something larger and quieter. The feeling of understanding all at once, that what you do when no one is watching is not wasted. That kindness does not disappear when it is not acknowledged. That it moves the way water moves, finding its level, filling the spaces that need filling, arriving eventually where it was always going to arrive. Evelyn came back from the kitchen with 3 cups of tea on a tray, moving carefully the way she always moved now, and set it on the table between them. She sat in her chair by the window with the particular composure of a woman who has been waiting a long time for her son to be 40 minutes away and who has decided not to make too much of it because making too much of things is not how she operates, but whose eyes, when she looked at Thomas, said everything she was not saying aloud. Marcus stayed for 1 cup of tea. Then he said he had somewhere to be, which was not entirely true, but was the right thing to say in a room where a mother and her son needed to be alone together in the ordinary Saturday afternoon of the life they were beginning to rebuild. He went back upstairs to 4B. Lily was at the kitchen table drawing, which was where she was most Saturday mornings. She looked up when he came in and then looked back down at her drawing, and then looked up again with the radar she had for his expressions. Good, she said. Good, he said. She nodded and went back to drawing. He put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen window looking at the parking lot. Dorothy's Lexus was in its spot. She was in Mill Haven for the weekend, staying in apartment 2B, not performing anything. He sent her a text. He wrote, Thomas told me about the call. Thank you, she replied 4 minutes later. He needed to hear it from someone he didn't feel he had to protect. I was the right person to tell him. Pause and then, your mother was right, by the way. Some things are exactly what they appear to be. He looked at the text for a moment. Then he put the phone in his pocket and poured 2 cups of tea and brought one to Lily at the table and sat down across from her. She was drawing the ocean. Not from the book, from memory, the shapes of things she had carried in her mind from the pages and made her own. A whale in deep water. Light coming down from the surface in long pale columns. Small fish moving in formation in the middle distance. It's beautiful, he said. She considered it with the serious eye of a person who is their own most honest critic. I think the light is almost right, she said. I'm still working on the light. He looked at the drawing. The light was more than almost right. It was the truest thing in it. But he understood that she needed to keep working on it, that the working on it was part of what made it hers. He drank his tea. She drew. The March afternoon moved through the window in the slow, shifting way of Ohio in the turn between seasons. Not yet spring and no longer fully winter. The light doing the thing that light does when the world is deciding what to become next. He thought about 11 months and a bottle of water. He thought about a woman at a table by a window who had chosen to look. He thought about the truck that ran quietly now and the brake pads that no longer wore the sound of deferred things. He thought about Victor Sands at a new job and Thomas Tran 40 minutes away and Evelyn in her chair by the window with her Bible and her tea and her son sitting across from her on a Saturday afternoon that had arrived. Finally, the way the good things always arrive. Not with announcement. Not with fanfare. Simply, quietly, inevitably. Because someone had been paying attention. And because paying attention, it turned out, was another word for love. He set his cup down. He looked at his daughter drawing the ocean in the morning light. You know, he said. She looked up. I should have been eating lunch the whole time. She looked at him with the expression she had inherited from her mother. The one that said, I know and I forgive you and also please don't do that again. All in a single look. I know, she said. But you're eating it now. He smiled. Yeah, he said. I am. She went back to the whale in the deep water, working on the light, getting it almost right, then a little more right, then closer still. Outside, Mill Haven went on. The parking lot held its ordinary afternoon. The second floor hallway light held steady. Somewhere below, in apartment 2C, a mother poured her son a second cup of tea. And in apartment 2B, a woman sat at her table by the window and looked at the world with the patient, certain attention of someone who has always known that if you watch long enough and stay still long enough and trust that goodness is out there, even when it is not performing for anyone, you will eventually see it. She always did. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.